Welcome. So today is Sunday morning, right before the November 4th election. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't even know that we had an election coming up because it's just propositions. And when I say just propositions, that's not what we should be thinking about it because this affects all of us. So I wanted to talk about your voice, your vote, and then understanding these 17 Texas constitutional amendment propositions. Because I just was reading that people were confused or they thought that they were not clear. And so I want to clear it up for you. This is your Wichita Falls. And as always, I'm here to educate, to allow you to be more informed. And today I want to talk about something I'm sure some of you are like, oh, this is too boring. I don't even want to look at it. But it's our life. And this is how we show up in a democracy. The Texas constitutional amendments, which is what they are, 17 of them written in language lawyer could love. And that doesn't matter because literally they're just words. So here's the deal. It's our Constitution, our Texas Constitution. And this is one of the few times that we get to have a direct say in how Texas ends. Now, because you may think it's confusing because you're not familiar with those particular words, it's not political trickery. It's just legislative lingo. And I'm going to say that one of the things that I did that probably nobody, not even our Congress did back in the day when the ACA was first proposed to Congress, I read the entire bill. If I recall, it was thousands of pages in length. And legislative lingo, it's just a thing. And lawyers and legislators use all of these confusing words, even though they're not confusing. They're just the way that things are written in our legislative system. But that should never keep us from using our voice. So this is what I want to do. I want to break it down a little bit for you so that you can really understand it. Because the most important part of all of this is go out and vote, 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 vote. Every few years, Texans get to vote on changes to our state constitution. These are not federal laws. They're state rules about how we handle our taxes, our schools, our infrastructure, and public policy. This is the sad part. In the last election, only about 14% of Texans showed up. So let's raise that number because it means that a handful of people are deciding how 30 million of us live, drive, farm, and pay taxes. I, for one, do not want to relegate that to 14% of the population. And if you've moved here from California, like I did, New York, or anywhere else where your vote felt drowned out, welcome to Texas. That's because this is your shot to actually make your voice count. So what's on this ballot? There's no candidates. So I have a feeling that that's part of the reason people go, I don't care about that. But you should. There's 17 propositions. And here is the very simple truth. Most of them are about money. I teach about money in abundance. So of course that's important to me. Taxes. Holy cow, I don't want any more of those. Education, which should be important to everybody, and fairness. So there's things in there, and I'm going to go over them about helping technical colleges, stopping new state taxes on investments, protecting widows, spouses of veterans. Who doesn't want to do that, right? But I'm going to share both sides. Funding water projects and dementia research, giving bigger homestead exemptions for homeowners. Of course, that's, near and dear to my heart. Exemptions for seniors and the disabled for their homestead exemptions, affirming parental rights and clarifying that only U.S. citizens can vote. I promise you there's nothing scary in here. There's nothing sneaky. These are just updates to how Texas spends, saves, and serves. So I want to share with you a lay person's understanding of these propositions so that you are informed and, more importantly, that you get out and vote, vote, vote. I do want to start by talking about how a proposition gets onto the ballot here in Texas, because I'm a Southern California girl, and literally the way they do it there is a little wonky. Basically, you have to get a certain number of signatures that are registered voters to get something on the ballot. The whole thing has lost its way in California, and so it doesn't feel like it's really congruent. So if you're from California, you know what I'm talking about. And I don't have to spend a lot of time on California. But here in Texas, what happens is the state legislature must, by two-thirds, two-thirds. Do you know how big of a deal that is to get two-thirds of parties? These are bipartisan issues that two-thirds of the legislature can get something on the ballot. So in order for a proposition to show up on the ballot, two-thirds of our legislative body in Texas had to pass it to get on the ballot. So it's not as if this is a one-sided deal, but listen, there's always two sides to every story. So I want to talk about these propositions one by one by one. So what I'm going to share with you is each proposition, what it's concerning, and then how the language is on the ballot, because I'm going to share with you in the show notes here exactly how the whole legislation is written, which is, kind of in depth, and you don't need a law degree to read it, but it helps. But I'm going to tell you what the proposition is about, and then read the proposition, put it on the screen, and then share exactly what it means. So the very first proposition is about Texas state technical colleges. And it says the constitutional amendment providing for the creation of the Permanent Technical Institution Infrastructure Fund and the available Workforce Education Fund to support the capital needs of educational programs offered by the Texas State Technical College System. Very specific for technical college systems. And I'm going to tell you right now, with AI coming on board, it's probably important that we notice that. So this one focuses on the Texas State Technical Colleges. And here's what it really means. This amendment would create two new permanent funds, basically long-term savings accounts for our state's technical college system. So in case you didn't know, there are 11 campuses across Texas that train people in skilled and vocational fields like welding, technology, and mechanics. And they offer certifications and 2-year degrees instead of this long-time 4-year degree. In the 2023-24 school year, over 11,000 students were enrolled. So these funds would help these technical schools buy land, build new classrooms, upgrade labs, and purchase modern equipment so students can learn the skills local employers actually need. So the big question, where does the money come from? Of course, it's $850 million. It's a one-time allocation of $850 million from the state's general revenue fund, which have a surplus, by the way. So if you're wondering how to vote, so this is the bottom line, because all of these propositions are yes or no. So vote yes for Proposition 1 if you believe Texas should invest one-time $850 million in training skilled workers and updating our technical schools. You vote no against Prop 1 if you don't think that state money should be used for this purpose. Easy peasy. It's simple as that. It's about whether you think the state should put major funds towards hands-on workforce education for Texas. Done. So we're going to move on to Prop 2. Proposition 2 talks about capital gains. Well, first of all, I want to talk about what capital gains are because some people go, I don't even know what that is. Why would I care? So as an investor, because I talk about that to everybody about abundance, capital gains is the money you make by increasing an investment. So for instance, if you invested in the stock market and you've made money, that's called a capital gains. If you buy a house and you flip it, whatever you bought it for, say you bought it for $20,000 and you sold it for 100, you minus all your repairs, that difference is capital gains. You buy art, you buy anything, any asset, and it increases in value. That increase in value is what we call capital gains. So with capital gains, it's important to know that we don't have in Texas capital gains taxes in the current time. So let's talk about Prop 2. This Prop 2 says the constitutional amendment prohibiting, so it says we don't want to do it, prohibits the imposition of a tax on the realized or unrealized capital gains of an individual family, estate, or trust. So if you're inheriting money, it would talk about that also. So this basically, Prop 2 deals with capital gains tax. That's the tax that some states, California and more, charge on profits you make when you sell something, just like I said. So right now, Texas does not have a capital gains tax. And this amendment would make sure the state can never create one in the future, unless, of course, somebody came along and created another constitutional amendment. But in plain English, if you sell your home, your land, or some investments and make a profit, the state of Texas cannot start taxing that profit down the road. This is setting it in stone. Now, here's the thing. There's no public cost or spending attached to this amendment. So passing or rejecting it doesn't spend or save the state any money because it doesn't have it now. But when it comes time to vote, this is a proposition that says if you vote yes, you believe Texas should stay one of the few states that never taxes capital gains. This keeps it also attractive for investors and businesses to come here to get out of those states that do that. Honestly, more people possibly. And a vote against Proposition 2 is if you think Texas should keep the option open to tax those profits someday as a future revenue stream. So it's pretty easy. Yes, we don't want capital gains ever. No says maybe we'll do it sometime in the future. That's really all it is. It just locks in our current no capital gains tax policy permanently. So let's move on to Prop 3. This is about bail for serious crimes. So the way the proposition reads is the constitutional amendment requiring the denial of bail under certain circumstances to persons accused of certain offenses punishable as a felony. So it doesn't say all people. This is about bail reform. And specifically, when judges can or can't allow bail for people accused of serious crimes. And here's what it really means. Right now in Texas, judges can only deny bail after a full court process in very limited cases. This amendment would make it easier for judges to deny bail for people accused of violent felonies. These things include murder, aggravated assault, or indecency with a child. Basically, it's saying when releasing them in those cases might pose a threat to the public. The idea is to keep potentially dangerous offenders in jail while they're awaiting trial instead of letting them out on bail. So there's no public cost or spending tied to this amendment either. It doesn't raise or spend state money. Now, when you go to vote, you get to have the yes or the no, as on all the other propositions. So you would vote for Proposition 3 if you believe judges should have the power to deny bail to violent offenders to better protect the public. You would vote no or against Proposition 3 if you believe denying bail could go too far and violate the principle that defendants are innocent until proven guilty. That is your right to say this is about balancing public safety with individual rights before a trial. That's as simple as I can make that. So Proposition 4, we always talk about water in Texas, and especially in North Texas, it's super hot and we've had droughts. So this proposition reads this way. The constitutional amendment to dedicate a portion of the revenue derived from state sales and use tax, to the Texas Water Fund and to provide for the allocation and use of that revenue. So that sounds a little wordy, but let's break this down. This proposition is all about water. That's it, all about water. Something we all know is becoming a bigger issue across Texas. I'm telling you, when we're in a drought, we really start to talk about water. We're not necessarily in one right here in North Texas, but what it really means is this amendment would take a portion of the state sales tax revenue. So state sales tax, when you pay on things that you buy at the store, that's money we already pay when we shop, right? So it's not coming out of your pocket necessarily, other than when you shop, and permanently dedicate part of it to the Texas Water Fund. That fund helps pay for things like fixing and upgrading aging water systems. We have those, trust me. It would also help pay for improving infrastructure in rural areas. Hello, Wichita Falls. And building new water supplies to meet future demand. We need to begin to look forward in what is happening with our water supplies. But, in other words, it's a way to make sure Texas has long-term reliable funding for water, one of our most critical resources, without, key note here, without creating a new tax, because it's coming out of a tax that we already pay, which is the sales tax. This doesn't raise taxes. Again, this doesn't raise taxes. It just reallocates some of the sales tax money that's already coming in. Now, when you head to the polls, vote Proposition 4 if you believe part of our state's existing tax money should be set aside to maintain and improve Texas's water systems. That's it. A no vote if you think that sales tax revenue should stay in the general fund or be used for other purposes. It's as simple as that. You get to decide how you want this tax revenue on the sales tax to be used. This really is about planning ahead and making sure that the water keeps flowing for our communities, our farms, and our future growth, which is happening all the time exponentially. So Proposition 5 is, maybe you don't pay attention to this, but it's really important for our farmers, is about animal feed. So this constitutional amendment reads this way. The constitutional amendment authorizing the legislature to exempt, means they don't have to pay it, from ad valorem taxes, those are property taxes, for those of you that get confused, tangible personal property consisting of animal feed held by the owner of the property for sale at retail. Okay, sounds a little more complicated than it really is, because this has to do with property taxes and animal feed. Property taxes just aren't on your real estate. It sounds a little mouthful, but it's actually pretty simple. Here's what it really means. Right now, animal feed, so what you feed your animals, your horses, your cows, your pigs, your chickens, is already exempt from taxes. The animal feed itself, when it's harvested or when it's sold. But this amendment would add a third exemption for when that feed is just sitting in storage waiting to be sold. Do you know that the farmers have to pay money on that? They have to pay taxes on it when it's in storage. It doesn't seem fair to me, but you guys decide for yourself. Basically, this says if you own a feed store or sell livestock feed, you wouldn't have to pay property tax on the inventory that's in your warehouse or storage bins. So the Legislative Budget Board says the impact on state or local revenue would be minimal. That's an assessment by the Legislative Budget Board. It says it won't make a big difference in the amount of tax money collected overall. It's on feed. But when it comes time to vote, your yes vote on Proposition 5 says you support giving feed retailers and ranchers another small tax break, even if it means a little bit less property tax revenue for local governments. And I can tell you, the property taxes that we gather in our state come mostly from our real estate. And a vote against it, no, says if you think we already have enough tax exemptions and want to keep things as they are, vote against it. This one is about whether or not you want to extend an existing tax break just a little bit further for Texas agriculture businesses. Anybody know a farmer? They would love it. Proposition 6 is about securities transactions. So how many of you are even doing security transactions? This may or may not be important, but because you don't understand it, maybe you just don't want to vote on it. I don't know. But the thing is, you can have a choice to vote on all or some. This constitutional amendment prohibits the legislature from enacting a law imposing an occupation tax on certain entities that enter into transactions conveying securities or imposing a tax on certain securities transactions. Once again, if you don't know anything about securities, it can just make your head spin a little bit. So I want to share, this one deals with investments and taxes on securities. Oh, what goes? Basically, stocks, bonds, and the people or companies who handle those trades. That's it. That's who it affects. But here's what it really means. Right now, Texas does not have a tax on buying or selling stocks or bonds. And this amendment would make sure the state can't add one in the future. So remember when I was talking about capital gains, the state of Texas, we don't have any income tax. And so all of these other types of taxes would or could be put upon the businesses or the individuals investing. And just as an aside, as an abundance teacher, I always talk about investments. I have a great book called Rooted in Wealth. So you want to invest in yourself, but you want to invest in outside of yourself. So here's the thing. This proposition would also prevent any new occupation tax on these financial institutions, on brokers and dealers who manage those transactions. So, simple terms, this keeps Texas from ever creating a Wall Street style tax on trading or investment activity. Now, I don't know if you know this, but Texas is becoming the new Wall Street, by the way. That's just an aside. There's no immediate cost or new spending because we don't have it right now. It's simply a protection against adding a new kind of tax later. So I'm not a big on tax person, but when you're ready to vote, a yes vote on Proposition 6 is if you believe Texas should stay investment friendly and never tax stock or bond transactions. Giveaway there. A vote against Proposition 6. If you think the state should keep the option to create a tax on financial trades someday as a source of revenue. So in a nutshell, this one decides whether Texas should permanently ban taxes on investment transactions. That's it. Proposition 7. This talks about surviving spouses of veterans. We in Wichita Falls love our veterans because we've got a base right here. We've got a lot of retired veterans, but this is for the surviving spouses of veterans. And the constitutional amendment authorizing the legislature to provide for an exemption, meaning no pay, from ad valorem taxation, that's your property taxes, of all or part of the market value of the residence homestead of the surviving spouse of a veteran who died as a result of a condition or disease that is presumed, important, under federal law to have been service connected. All right. So this one focuses on Texas veterans and their surviving spouses. What it really means is this amendment would give a property tax break to the widow or widower of a veteran who died from a disease or condition related to their military service. It includes things like toxic exposure, burn pit, or other service-connected illnesses that are, and this is important, recognized under federal law. So we're not making up new laws. It's just the way the federal government recognizes it. So if a veteran passes away from one of those conditions, their surviving spouse, as long as they haven't remarried, would qualify for a partial or full property tax exemption on their home, which is remarkable and wonderful. And we already give it to disabled veterans. But this aligns Texas law with a recent federal law that already recognizes these conditions as service connected. So, like most tax exemptions, this could mean the state and local governments collect a little bit less in property tax revenue. But the Legislative Budget Board doesn't expect a large impact because this is a very select group of people, spouses of deceased veterans that fall into that category. So when it comes to voting, you want to vote for Proposition 7 if you believe surviving spouses of veterans who die from service-related conditions should get property tax relief. That's really what that is. And a vote against Proposition 7 is if you think that expanding property tax exemptions too much could reduce revenue for local communities. As I said, our state is in a surplus right now. So that's a choice for or against. This one is just really about how Texas honors and supports families of those who've served and sacrificed. You can imagine which way I might vote on that. So we come to Proposition 8, and we are talking about inheritance taxes, those taxes that you have to pay if you inherit property. So this constitutional amendment reads this way: the constitutional amendment to prohibit the legislature from imposing death taxes, inheritance taxes, applicable to a decedent's property or the transfer of an estate, inheritance, legacy, succession, or gift, because you can gift people things. That's a long one too. This deals with something called the death tax, also known as the estate or inheritance tax. If you've ever inherited property, you know what it is. If you've ever heard of it, that's what generally we call it. And here's what it really means. Texas does not currently have a death or inheritance tax, and this amendment would make sure that the state can't create one in the future. Once again, these are taxes that we don't have right now and on so many of these propositions. And what this is an attempt to do is to create a pathway that says we're not going to do it. Because if someone passes away and leaves property, money, or other assets to their heirs, the state is not allowed to tax them that inheritance ever. And so the federal government does it. So you would get a double whammy with the state. There's no cost or spending tied to this one, and it wouldn't change anything right now since Texas doesn't have the tax. It just locks in the current policy, so a future legislature couldn't decide to add one later. So when you're filling out your ballot, you vote for Proposition 8 if you believe estates and inheritances should remain tax-free in Texas and that families shouldn't pay taxes twice on the same money. You vote against Prop 8 if you think Texas should keep the option open to create an inheritance tax someday as a possible revenue source. So this one is really about whether Texas should permanently ban a state inheritance or estate tax. Boom, that's it. We come to Proposition 9. Talks about business equipment and inventory, which you may or may not have a business, but the fact is you may have a business someday, and this would affect you. So this constitutional amendment to authorize the legislature to exempt, once again, you don't have to pay it, from ad valorem taxation, that's your property taxes, exempt a portion of the market value, so taxes are based on value, of the tangible personal property a person owns that is held or used for the production of income. Okay, so let me break this down if you own a business. This one is about business property taxes because that's what these taxes are. Specifically, on the equipment and inventory businesses use to make money. So we're taxing you on all of the equipment. You have a restaurant, you've got the stove, you've got the pizza oven, you've got all of that. Here's what it really means. Right now, businesses in Texas can only exempt $2,500 worth of tools, machinery, or inventory from property taxes. That is not very much, folks. And if you've got a bigger business, you've got a factory, all of that inventory and all of that equipment is taxed. So this amendment would raise that exemption to $125,000. So in real world, this $2,500 is hardly anything, and it's been that way for a long time. A huge jump that especially helps small businesses. I'm all about the small businesses because they rely on expensive equipment or supplies. So for example, if you own a small manufacturing shop, a bakery, a local service business with equipment, this could significantly lower your property tax bill because taxes are the death of business. The only cost to the state or local governments would be in the reduction in property tax revenue. Again, This is not where the majority of our property tax revenue is coming from, because some of that taxable value would now be exempt. The difference between 2,500, 125,000. So when you're voting, a vote yes for Prop 9 is saying that you believe increasing this exemption will help small businesses and ease their tax burden, even if it means a slight drop in local tax revenue. You vote no if you think that cutting business property taxes could reduce funds for schools, cities, or counties that depend on those taxes, which, as I said, we're in a surplus. That's how you vote no. In short, this one's about helping small business owners keep more of their income by raising the tax-free limit on what they own and use to run their businesses. Not what they make on their businesses, the things they use to run their business. Prop 10, property tax exemption for homes that were destroyed by fire. This is really important because we do have quite a few fires in the state of Texas in certain times. So it reads, the constitutional amendment to authorize the legislature to provide for a temporary exemption from ad valorem taxes, property taxes, of the appraised value of an improvement to a resident's homestead that is completely destroyed by fire. Okay, let me break this down for you. This one deals with property taxes and homes that have been destroyed by fire. Now, if you've ever had that happen, it can be devastating in and of itself. But here's what it really means. Right now, if your home burns down, there isn't a clear process for the local tax office, that's who creates the assessment to create taxes on your property. There's not a clear process for them to reduce or remove the property tax value of what's been destroyed. This amendment would allow lawmakers to create a system where homeowners get a temporary tax break on the portion of their home that's gone while they're rebuilding. So here's a scenario. If a house is completely destroyed in a fire, the owner wouldn't have to keep paying property taxes as if it were still standing. Can you imagine your house is leveled from fire and it's a $500,000 house and you're still paying property taxes on $500,000? That doesn't seem fair. There's no big state expense here because it simply gives local tax assessors the authority to pause or lower taxes on fire damaged homes. So when you go to vote, if you vote yes for this proposition, you believe homeowners shouldn't be taxed on property that has been destroyed by a fire. It's as simple as that. You can vote against Proposition 10 if you think the exemption should include all disasters like floods or tornadoes rather than just fires, or if you prefer to keep the current law. So it's one of those things that I think that could be added in there. It's really about fairness, making sure Texans who lose their homes to fire aren't paying taxes on something that no longer exists. And probably they should incorporate these other natural disasters. I didn't write the proposition. Now, Proposition 11, homestead exemption for elderly and disabled Texans. We love our property tax exemptions. Elderly, so of course this one is near and dear to my heart. The constitutional amendment authorizing the legislature to increase the amount of the exemption from ad valorem taxes, property taxes, by the school district, that's the property taxes, of the market value of the resident's homestead of a person who is elderly or disabled. Let me tell you what that means. This one focuses on property tax relief for elderly and disabled Texans. Here's what it really means. Right now, people who are 65 or older, or who are disabled get an extra $10,000 school tax exemption. That comes off the value. It doesn't mean the $10,000 of taxes. The school tax exemption on their home, in addition to the regular homestead exemption. This amendment would raise that amount to $60,000. So I want to give you an example. If your home is valued at $200,000, the school district taxes only would tax you on $140,000 of it instead of $190,000, which is the $10,000 right now. A pretty big savings. And this exemption is on top of any other homestead exemptions you already qualify for. The financial impact would be that school districts collect less property tax revenue, this much, but the state is expected to cover that loss through other funding. So, as I always say, any property tax exemption, I don't care where it's coming from, I'll take it. That's my own personal opinion. You can vote however you need to. So you want to vote yes on Proposition 11 if you believe seniors and disabled Texans should get additional property tax relief to help them stay in their homes. Boom. You vote against Proposition 11 if you're concerned about reduced local revenue or how the state will make up the difference. And as I said, we're in a surplus. We already have some of the most incredible property taxes here in Texas. We've got a surplus. It's really, really, really about giving a bigger break to Texans living on fixed incomes so they can better afford to stay in their homes. Well, I don't know who's against that, but so Prop 12. This is about the State Commission on Judicial Conduct. This one may be a little controversial. I don't know. It says the constitutional amendment regarding the membership of the State Commission on Judicial Conduct, the membership of the tribunal to review the commission's recommendations, and the authority of the commission, the tribunal, and the Texas Supreme Court to more effectively sanction judges and justices for judicial misconduct. That was a mouthful, I will say. Now, I want to explain. This one deals with how Texas oversees judges and justices. You may care about this. You may not care about this. But these are the people who sit on the benches in our courts. And here's what it really means. The State Commission on Judicial Conduct is the group that investigates judges when there are complaints or allegations of misconduct. And believe me, judges are just as prone to misconduct as anybody else in the world. But it talks about things like abuse of power or unethical behavior. Right now, the way the commission is made up is a little complicated, okay, I would say. Currently, the governor appoints 5 members, the State Bar of Texas appoints 2, and the Texas Supreme Court appoints 6. These commissions are always made up this way. I'm in real estate. I know how these work. This amendment would change that structure this way. It would give the governor 2 more appointments. It would remove the appointments made by the State Bar of Texas. Important. And it would keep the 6 appointments made by the Supreme Court. So depending on how you look at the State Bar and the Supreme Court and the governor, it would also raise the age requirement for members from 30 to 35, kind of like that, and give the commission, the reviewing tribunal, and the Supreme Court stronger authority to discipline judges when needed. Here's the thing is, when the State Bar is appointing them, it's kind of like they're appointing their, it's incestuous, if you will. There's no new cost to taxpayers, and it's more about reorganizing who gets to pick the members and how they do their job. This is pretty complicated, and if you don't really have an opinion, then don't vote on it. But when it's time to vote, if you vote yes for Proposition 12, it's because you believe the governor as an elected official should have more say in appointing members, giving voters more indirect influence over the process. That's it. If you vote against it, you believe this change gives too much political control to the governor or reduces independent oversight of judges. It's pretty simple, and it's a very complicated issue for a lot of people. So in short, this one's about how we hold judges accountable and who gets to decide who's on the watchdog committee, period. Boom. So we have 5 more propositions. I'm going to go fast because this is my favorite. Prop 13, raising the homestead exemption for all homeowners. I've been here since 2019, and I've watched it go from $25,000 homestead exemption to we're now at 100. This constitutional amendment is to increase the amount of the exemption of residents' homesteads from ad valorem taxes, property taxes, by a school district, because it only comes off the school district taxes, from 100,000 to 140,000. All right. This one also has to do with property taxes. But unlike Proposition 11, which was just for seniors and disabled Texans, this is for everybody. This is so cool because in Wichita Falls, we get the benefit of all of that. The property values are so much lower than they are in the rest of the state. Literally, you could almost have all of your school taxes wiped out, which is kind of what's happened to me. Here's what it really means. Every Texas homeowner gets what's called a homestead exemption. You have to live in the house. That's the amount of your home's value that's not taxed by your local school district. That's what the homestead exemption is. Right now, that exemption is 100,000. As I said, it went from 25 to 40 to 100. This amendment would raise it to 140,000, which is so cool because the values keep going up and we aren't getting additional exemptions, which we are with this proposition. So let's say that your home is worth 300,000. Instead of paying school taxes on 200,000, you'd now only pay taxes on 160,000. That's amazing. And it's a beautiful savings, especially with these rising property values. So just like Prop 11, the state has said it's going to cover the loss of school tax revenue, which, trust me when I say it isn't that much because the values keep going up. So local schools aren't taking a hit from this change because it's not hurting our schools. So if you vote yes for Proposition 13, you are supporting lowering school property taxes, the taxes themselves for all Texas homeowners. I'm sorry, I got two hands up for that. If you know anything about me, I've given many of community meetings on property taxes itself. And it lowers your monthly mortgage payment. Oh, by the way, if you vote against Proposition 13, you're worried about how the state will make up the difference or think it could shift costs elsewhere for schools. I'm telling you, we have a surplus, and that's because the state is managed that way. This amendment is really about across the board property tax relief, giving every homeowner a bit more breathing room. Oh, who doesn't want that? Okay, Prop 13 talks about dementia. We have a dementia issue in our whole country. So this constitutional amendment is providing for the establishment of the Dementia Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. I love the idea of prevention. Establishing the Dementia Prevention and Research Fund to provide money for research on and prevention and treatment of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and related disorders in this state. And transferring to that fund $3 billion from the state general revenue. $3 measly billion. We have so much money in that state revenue, general revenue. This one is about medical research, specifically research on dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other brain-related diseases that affect so many Texas families. I know you all know somebody that's been affected by Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. Here's what it really means. This amendment would create a new state organization called the Dementia Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. Woo-hoo. And this will also have a fund to pay for its work, that $3 billion. The state would put that $3 billion from general revenue into that fund, which would be used exclusively to support research and treatment for brain diseases. It would help fund prevention programs, which that is in and of itself huge, and attract top scientists and medical projects right here in Texas. That is so cool. We want to bring all those projects here. In addition, $300 million a year would be available to the fund after the first year. In addition, $300 million a year would be available to the fund after the first year for continued support. That $3 billion comes from the state's budget surplus. As I keep saying, we have a surplus. So it's not a new tax. It's money Texas already has, but would be directing toward health research. So when you head to the polls, your yes vote for Proposition 14 would be because you believe this kind of state-funded research will help fight Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's, while boosting medical innovation in Texas. You want to vote against Prop 14 if you're concerned about the size of the investment or how the institute would be managed. Because in short, this one asks whether Texas should invest billions now to improve the future of healthcare and research for brain health later. We have 3 more propositions. 15, let's talk about parents' rights. The way this constitutional amendment reads is it says the constitutional amendment affirming that parents are the primary decision makers for their children. That is it. It is so simple and so succinct. This one's, like I said, short, simple. It's all about parents' rights and who has the final say in raising children. You either agree with that or you don't. Here's what it literally means. Right now, Texas law and court rulings already recognize that parents have broad rights over their children's care, education, and upbringing. What this amendment would do is take that existing principle, it's not a law, and make it part of the Texas Constitution. Carve it in stone, officially stating that parents are the primary decision makers for their children. Nobody else. That means parents, not the government or schools, would have the ultimate authority when it comes to things like education, health decisions, and moral or religious upbringing. Specifically sets out those categories. There's no cost or funding connected to this one. It's purely about legal protection and how much weight the state constitution gives to parents' authorities. And when it comes time to vote, your yes vote on this proposition is if you believe parents should have clearly defined constitutional authority over how their children are raised, taught, and cared for. You want to vote against this proposition if you think this amendment isn't necessary because those rights are already protected, or if you're concerned it could create conflicts with public school policies or child protection laws. So those are your options. So in short, this one is about formally putting parental rights in the state constitution to make them harder to challenge in the future. And Proposition 16 is about citizenship and voting. It says this constitutional amendment clarifying that a voter must be a United States citizen. Boom. It's basically already the way we operate here. It's short but important. It's about who can legally vote in Texas elections. And here's what it really means. Right now, Texas law already says that to register to vote, you must be at least 18 years old, not a convicted felon, unless your sentence is complete, mentally competent, and a U.S. citizen. This amendment doesn't change that rule. It just adds it clearly into the Texas Constitution so that the requirement can't be changed later without another statewide vote. That's what this is all about. These Texas Constitution changes is they have to be passed by 2/3 of the congressional of Texas and then put to a statewide vote. In other words, it's reinforcing what's already law, that only U.S. citizens can vote in Texas elections, local, state, or federal. Boom, that's it. There's no cost or spending tied to this amendment. It simply makes the citizenship requirement more permanent and explicit. So when you go to the polls, you can vote yes or you can vote no. If you vote yes on Prop 16, it's because you believe the state should clearly and permanently require U.S. citizenship to vote. If you vote against Prop 16, It's because you think this amendment isn't necessary since it's already required under state and federal law. So, in short, this one's not changing how voting works. It's just putting the citizenship rule in writing in the state constitution. And it makes it crystal clear for anybody in the future. And last but not least, Proposition 17, border security property tax exemption. One more property tax exemption. This constitutional amendment to authorize the legislature to provide for an exemption from an ad valorem taxation of the amount of the market value of real property located in a county that borders the United Mexican States that arises from the installation or construction on the property of border security infrastructure and related improvement. Okay, another mouthful. Let's drill that down. This one is about property taxes and border security. So if you're interested in that, this is something you want to pay attention to. This is specifically for people who own land along the Texas-Mexico border. I can assure you that that's been challenging for a lot of people down there. This is what it really means. This amendment would let the legislature create a property tax exemption for landowners in Texas counties that share a border with Mexico. If they allow border security infrastructure to be built or installed on their property. That's the only exemption. This would include things like fencing or walls, cameras, lighting, or other security improvements. Now, here's what I want you to know, because these are related to border protection, not just putting them up. And if somebody has that, they're being taxed on the improvements at this point. Now, when those kinds of improvements are built on private land, the owner gets a one-time payment from the state as compensation. This amendment would go a step further and allow them to avoid property tax increases caused by those improvements, because that can be substantial. The cost here would be in the form of lost property tax revenue, again, because of an exemption for those counties, since they'd be giving exemptions on the added value of that infrastructure, which most of that infrastructure was built by probably a government entity anyways. So when you head to the polls, this is a yes or no vote. Once again, if you vote yes on Proposition 17, it's because you believe landowners along the border should receive ongoing property tax relief when they cooperate with state or federal border security efforts. And a vote against is if you think this one-time payment that they get because they allowed somebody to build something on their property already compensates the landowners and further tax breaks aren't necessary. Pretty simple. In short, this one is about whether the state should add a tax incentive for property owners who support or host border security projects. That's it. So just to sum this up, don't let the jargon stop you. If you ever read one of these on the ballots and thought, wait, what did I just read? You're not alone. That's why it's so important to research before you vote. And I hope that I helped you with this. I've linked this plain English summary to the show notes so you can read what each one actually does, like you're in the 5th grade, not law school. And here's a tip. You don't have to vote on every proposition. You do not have to vote on every proposition. You can leave some blank if you're unsure. Just don't skip voting entirely. So voting isn't just a right, it's a responsibility, and it's how we keep our Texas state strong, free, and led by we the people, not just those politicians in Austin. So check your registration, read up, and most important, show up. Vote, vote, vote. Because whether you vote for or against, the worst choice you make is silence. I'll say it again. This is our Texas, and no fancy legal words or long ballots should ever make you forget that your voice matters. Go vote, y'all. I'm so proud of you for caring enough to learn. Election day is this Tuesday, November 4th, 2025. Go vote, y'all.